Good morning and welcome to Between Worlds. I'm Jennifer Kavanaugh, and today is March 1st, 2021. I had some really intense dreams last night again that I wanted to share. I woke up and was immediately told to share this one. So I was in the US, I believe I was in Washington. That was what I felt anyway in the dream, is I felt I was in Washington, DC. And I was sitting in this courtyard. I was in a rural, or not a rural, an urban area, and there was a group of us sitting at a long table, like you would see a patio, like for a restaurant. It was warm. We weren't cold. It wasn't like we were forced to sit outside because of measures. We were actually wanting to sit outside, and I knew the people we were with, but I wasn't really chatting with them. And so it was kind of like a back alley, but not like it was a main street, but it just felt really closed in. There was all of these older brick buildings. They were definitely commercial or government political type buildings, made of brick. It reminded me of like the older row houses, but from a commercial standpoint. And so where we were close to this corner of the street, and across kind of perpendicular to us, there was a group of row houses that were commercially owned. And I knew that they were politically based. And in front of the one building, there was this long, tall clock. But it didn't look like a clock as we know it, and like not the typical clock tower that you would see in an urban area. It looked more like a windmill, but I knew it was a clock. So at the top, there were where you would have the hands that would turn on the clock. It was actually blades that were turning. So it was more like a windmill, but it was definitely a clock. So anyway, we were sitting there eating a lunch, dinner per se, and then all of a sudden there's this huge bang, and the clock had exploded. And we also realized at the same time that the explosion had actually come from this building across the way, and in the explosion, it had also caused the clock to explode. And at that point, I knew someone that came in, someone I used to work with in in a government role. She had come into the space, and I haven't talked to this woman in many years. So I was surprised to see her, but not in the dream. And she had let us know that there was an explosion, and she had someone with her, a young man, who was trying to yell at the people that were in these buildings, because almost instantly after the explosion, there was these team of workers that came to address the issue. Like instantly, like the explosion happened, and in the next second, they were all there working on it. And I had said to her, I was like, wow, we're really lucky that the hands, which I described more as propellers, didn't fly off in the explosion, because they were rotating. If the way they had exploded, they could have come towards us and actually been a pretty dangerous weapon. But as it happened, it kind of just crumbled down to the ground. And the man that was with her, I don't know what relationship he was to her, was yelling at these workers that had arrived to, we'll say, assist the situation. But when he spoke, no words came out. Like there was sounds coming out, but it wasn't audible English, and it made no sense to anybody that was actually observing this. And so at this point, I ended up, I don't know whether she was telling me the story because she had been inside the building, or if I was just remoting into the building, but I was suddenly seeing what had happened leading up to the explosion from inside the building, as if watching a movie reel from inside. And so inside this building, the explosion actually happened on the upper floor. So there was maybe three or four floors in this particular building. And on the upper floor, there was a large office, pretty much an open office with a large old wooden desk, like really large wooden desk right in the center. And there was a younger gentleman that was working at the desk, and it felt like he had been working late. He was definitely political in some fashion, and he was getting ready to leave. And so as he left the office, it was like, you know, those older buildings that it was like two or three buildings that had, been connected together at some point. So, you're exiting one building and entering another, but in this time, it would be considered one office space. So he was leaving that original building and stepping into the other room, which was actually another building originally. And when he stepped over the threshold, when both feet touched the floor, that's when the explosion happened. And in that moment, I remember doing a quick scan of the building and I didn't see anybody else in the building. It was almost like it was waiting for him to leave, for the building to be empty. And when he got into the other side, into the other room, there was another desk there, but there was more people. And because the explosion had happened, everyone was being told to hide under this wooden desk. So there was like 15 people trying to fit under the desk. And obviously there wasn't enough room for them all. So they were starting to argue about that. And at that point, I ended up coming back out onto the street level. That was as far as I saw from the inside. Now, what was interesting is as the workers were assisting, I guess, with whatever it was they were doing with this explosion, what they were doing is they were actually tearing down the building and the clock. And this took all of 5 minutes. Like the whole thing, it was almost like it just crumbled down, like it had turned into charcoal and you could just let it fall down with your hands. So they disassembled the clock. The building came down, just that one portion of the building, even though it was connected. The one that they had all moved into stayed, remained as was, but that portion of it had crumbled down. So it was like it had been isolated in this explosion. And then what was really interesting is the workers pulled this long screen all the way up, and it was like a backdrop for a movie or a photographer. So it was like that fabric type screen, and on that fabric was a digital print of exactly what had been there before. So it was the exact building, the exact clock. And I mean, obviously it wasn't 3D printed, but it looked like it was 3D printed, because from someone just walking by, you wouldn't know that it wasn't a building standing there. You would think it's a building, and you wouldn't even think to question it. It looked exactly as it had looked. And so as they put these screens up, and again, this took all of 5 minutes, they took the buildings down, they start pulling up this screen with these kind of faceless workers that were doing this work. And I remember sitting there going, oh gosh, what's going to happen to us, because we saw this. And the only reason that we know this is a screen is because we saw it being installed. Otherwise, we'd have no clue. We would just think it's a building and a clock, and we'd go about our business and ignore it. And then I remember hearing telepathically in my head, they're just going to wipe your memories. You're not a threat because it's so easy to wipe your memories. And I thought, okay, good. There was a sense of relief. And then I woke up. And I thought this was a really interesting dream. One, because the clock is very symbolic to me, because I think there's a lot of stuff going on with time right now. And a lot of people are experiencing time anomalies. And I think part of the spiritual and maybe physical, I don't know as much about the physical, battles that we're in right now is time, and how time has really been used to control us and generate emotions in us. Just think about the next time you have to go somewhere at a certain time. There's a level of anxiety always present of, am I going to make it on time, or I got to leave now in order to be there on time. So there's something symbolic with the clock and the clock being destroyed, but then another pseudo clock being put in place. And same with the building, that there's these structures in place, and the fact that they were political and that they have been torn down, but there's like a hologram holding it in place for the time being. So nobody is really aware that it's actually not there anymore. So there's these symbolic references in this particular dream that's very interesting to me. And you could say, well, maybe this has already happened, that maybe some of these, there's elements of structures that have been torn down, and now we're just looking at this hologram that's left in place to keep people going about their business for whatever reason that means. Or maybe this hasn't happened yet, maybe it's to come, or maybe it's happened in another parallel dimension. I don't know. Those answers I don't know. But there's some interesting things to ponder, and perhaps it means something different to you than it does to me. But it's given me a little bit of hope as well, in that maybe what we're seeing isn't exactly what's going on, which you could say is a fearful thing to think about. But it also gives me hope, because I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is more unpleasant than it is pleasant. And perhaps it's there for another purpose. I don't know. That's for you to decide, I guess, or for time to eventually show us. But I also don't believe that time is linear. So I think there is something with this clock reference, that the way we view and experience time is a linear fashion is starting to wane, and we may be moving a little bit closer into that quantum experience of time, where all time is really happening at once, and it's a matter of where we're putting our focus or how we're moving into the world, and where we're placing our energy. So there you have it. That's the that's the crazy morning dream that I had today. And I also had a second one that popped up that I had forgotten about until I wanted to get this one jotted down. And I had gone to the grocery store, and I haven't been in a while, so several months in person anyway. And I walked into the store just normal, smile on and getting my groceries, and not thinking anything about it. And when this happens in dreams, it always takes me a few minutes to remember the world as it is now. And there was another young gentleman there who smiled at me, and I smiled back. And I walked around the corner, and then that little bugger tried to steal my wallet. And so I got really angry, and I pulled it out of his hands, and he was not going to let go of it. And I started yelling at him and reminding him that families need to eat, and that you shouldn't be stealing from families who simply need to eat. You shouldn't be stealing at all, but when people are trying to provide for their families, it's a really cruel thing to do. And so anyway, I got my wallet back and continued on through the grocery store. And I was really concerned about my budget when I was there. So I was, putting things in the cart and then realizing I didn't have enough money for that and putting them back. And I was trying to make these decisions of what is most important food wise for my family. So I was getting some bread and some apples and things like that. And I slowly realized as I walked around the store, I mean, there was lots of people wearing their masks in the store, which is interesting that now that's come into the dream state, but none of the workers were. And I knew all the workers. I hadn't seen them in a while, and they were all smiling so brightly at me, which, isn't really a normal experience if you're not wearing a mask these days. And I went up to one of the workers and just asked how they were doing. And they explained to me that none of them were wearing a mask because they were protesting the new measures. That's how she explained it. They were protesting the new measures. So all the employees decided they weren't going to wear a mask. And that was their passive protest. So they were still working. And they were just smiling so bright. Like it was a completely different experience in the store than what we've probably been used to in the last year, because all of them were just smiles ear to ear, and you couldn't help but smile when you looked at them. And when that dream came back into my mind, it just made me smile again, of remembering that world where everywhere we went, we got to see everyone smile, and we would chat a bit more, and even if you weren't chatting, you could just, the energy was different than what it was now. So anyway, I add that in. Why not? So I hope everyone is doing well this morning, and we'll chat soon. Have a wonderful day.